Hey, what's going on, guys? It has been a while. I'm glad to see you back. Welcome to the Tabletop Pirates. And today I have a Doflamingo deck profile that I brought to locals. There we go. Brought this to locals last week for the first tournament of the little shop that I've been going to. And I managed to get first place with this leader. It was really fun. I got to play some interesting cards playing blue. The list definitely isn't set, so it was nice to mess around. It's kind of my plan for the coming weeks when I go to like locals and there's not like a big tournament coming up. I plan to just play a lot of like fun stuff, test some waters out, a lot of fun decks. Try and save the more popular decks for when like an event's actually coming up that I need to be at that level. So I have time to test around. Maybe we end up finding something that's not on the radar that's still just as good. But for today, I have the Dofi deck profile for you, and I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you there. Alrighty, welcome back, crewmates, to the Tabletop Pirates. And today I have for you my Doflamingo deck profile. This past weekend was the first locals. I went to my little local shop, and we went ahead and we actually snatched first place with the Dofi leader, winning this very cool Yamato winner promo. So before we get into this deck profile and I explain my card ratios and all that whatnot, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, so I know that you like what I'm doing right now and I can keep on doing it. But let's go ahead and get right into this with the Dofi leader himself. So, Dofi leader effect is as follows. With 2 Dawn under him, when he attacks, you can then pay 1 and you will flip over the top card of your deck. And if that card is a 7 Warlords type character with cost 4 or less, you can then play that card to your board free in rested. So there's a lot of targets that you can actually hit off this. Even in the limited card pool of the first set, there are more than enough targets for you to build very different things that you might want to do. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the 1-drops. The most important 1-drop in the deck will be the 4 copies of Perona. Perona is very important, and you definitely want to open her in your first hand so you can play her first turn and set up, because she costs 1, and then she lets you sculpt the top 5 cards of your deck and rearrange them in any order you want so that you can plan for your Dofi leader. And if you don't like any of them, she even lets you put them on the bottom if you're digging for something specific. So your main plan maybe, is when you go first, you have 1, you play the Perona, you sculpt your deck, and then on turn 2, you can go ahead and activate this, because you'll have 3 Dawn, so you put 2 under him, swing, pay the 1, and you get whatever you stacked with Perona. That's a pretty typical early game play that you can do if you open Perona. She's very good all throughout the game because she's so cheap to play, so that you can keep sculpting your deck. She's even recyclable with a card later on in the list. Oh, and the full art just looks really nice. Our next little 1-drop is 4 copies of the Trafalgar Law Blocker. So there's not much to say about this card, besides it just being a very good card because it is a cheap blocker. But it is recyclable in this deck because of the fact that it's a 7 Warlord, so you can get it from trash back to your hand with a card later. You can even hit it off the Dofi, though you don't want to because he's so weak and he's played and rested, he just gets run over by anything in the game. But other than being a blocker, there are some synergy with him just being a Warlord. In the 2 slot, we have 4 copies of Alvida herself. Now, first things first, she is a buggy pirate, so she has no synergy with the cards that fetch cards from the drop or anything like that. But she is 2k counter. And also, I'd like to say, do not sleep on her effect, because I have used it before. It's not all the time. It's definitely not every game. It's not even most games. But every once in a while, you might come up with a situation where her effect is relevant. And her effect is with a Dawn under her, and when she attacks, you get to control the board a bit. You can pitch a card from your hand to the trash, and then bounce a 3 or less to the owner's hand. So this can really help early game for controlling the tempo. If maybe your hand's kind of slow to start, or a little bit on the heavy side where you have a bunch of cards that you would play late game. That's all the 2-drops. Running into the 3-drop, we have the most important, the Don Quixote, Doflamingo himself. So this card has the same effect as Perona, so when played, you get to stack the top 5, and then switch him around, maybe put him on the bottom, whatever you're trying to get. But then he's also a blocker, and he does have attack points. Right? He's 4,000. I have swung with this before, so keep that in mind. He's also very recyclable. He's a target for the leader. Overall, he's a fantastic card. Now, the next card I'm going to put in a pair because it goes together with another card. So we play 2 copies of Smiley, and then the 4 copies of Caesar Clown. So Caesar Clown's effect is on KO. You play Smiley from deck. So we only play the 2 Smiley because he fetches them from deck. And then Smiley's effect is during your turn with a Dawn under him, he gains 1,000 for every card in your hand. So this card can actually get pretty big. I've actually swung for Smiley for like 9,000 with like 2 Dawn under him because I had a 6-card hand. But yeah, the point is when Caesar Clown dies, he replaces himself. So you don't lose any value if they decide to kill this. So whether they do or don't, you know, you get to have an attacker regardless. Although he is not a 7 Warlord, so don't get him mistaken with a card you can play off Dofi. That would be fantastic because he would be played in rest, and if they kill him, you get value anyway. That is not the case. He is Punk Hazard and a scientist, so keep that in mind. But overall, just as a blue card, I really like this little engine that I've been testing in the deck. It only takes up 6 slots, so that's good too. Next up, we're going with the 4 Gecko Moria. Now, this is the card I talked about earlier that lets you recycle things. He is also probably the best target off of Dofi because his effect's on play. So even when he comes in rested, it triggers and you get value off of it immediately. So even if they run this over, it doesn't matter. He lets you add any 7 Warlords or Thriller Bark Pirate with cost 4 or less from your drop to your hand. So even that is relevant because Perona is a Thriller Bark Pirate. So if you want another Perona, Moria can get her. So keep that in mind. That's actually very relevant. But I like to get the 3-drop Dofi a lot with this also, because it has Perona's effect, but is also a blocker, so there's some extra utility there. But he has a multitude of targets in this deck because most of the targets for the Dofi leader have to be 4 or less. So this can get any of them back. 4 copies of Boa Hankaku. Now, Boa is a fantastic card. She's a blocker, but she also has an effect that with a Dawn under her on block or attack, if you have 5 or less cards, you get to draw a card. So every time you block and every time you attack with her, as long as you're managing your hand correctly, you get to draw another card off of this. So you can get a lot of card advantage off of this if it goes unchecked, which, your opponent is probably going to want to kill this, like a lot of the time. But sometimes you don't need to leave her up as a blocker. Sometimes if you have like a Law or another blocker out like the Dofi, you can use this as your attacker, and it's no big deal, you still get the draw. And it's highly recyclable with the Moria if you want to get her back. We actually have the 3 copies of Marshall D. Teach, Blackbeard himself. So this card is really good early game because on play, he bounces at 3 or less. So since it's on play, when you use him on the Dofi, you get it. And in the late game, he's good for bouncing annoying little blockers, like the 2 costs and the 1 cost blockers that might be in your way for trying to go for maybe a threat that's on the board. When you swing with Dofi and play this off of the effect during the attack, you can immediately proc this and bounce whatever you want. This is also recyclable, which I have done, which is also very nice. 4 copies of the Little Dracul Mihawk. Another target for Dofi, but not only that, he is a 2k guard. So if you draw him, it is perfectly fine. He's good in your hand. If you get him off of the Dofi skill, you can actually use his effect when he attacks, which is for 1 Dawn under him, you get to sculpt your hand. You draw 2 and then discard 2. So it's not a plus or anything. It is a filter. So if your hand's looking a little clunky or something, this can really shape things up for you depending on the state of the game. Normally, if you draw this, you don't really want to commit it to field, though, unless you have to, if you just don't have any attackers. But, if you do, you do. I mean, he's 5k. He's not bad at all on the field. So that's all the targets for the Dofi leader himself. And then we have a secondary attacker in Virgo. So Virgo is good because he's just big. He only costs 5, and he's 7k. So this is going to be, something you just want to commit to the field just to have out a big guy and try and just pressure your opponent with. You know, he doesn't have effects, so we don't need to talk about anything. He's not a warlord. He can't be recycled. He's just a big guy that you can get value from. And then the Mac Daddy of the deck, we have 3 copies of the big Dracul Mihawk. And this is your big boy. This is the guy that comes out and on play, he can put any level 7 or lower guy on the bottom of the deck. So he outs a lot of cards, and he's big. So you want to play this guy pretty early, as soon as you can, really, just to get him established on the board, because it's going to be really hard to get rid of him. And then every turn you're just slamming in, you know. He's huge. He's 9k. There's not much more to say about it. He has a very simple effect, but it's a very good effect. His stats are huge. Use him as you will. Next is my event lineup. I only play 6 events, because I don't want to clog on them. So we have 2 copies of Overheat. The Overheato. So this card's actually really good, and it has multiple applications. So it's 2 costs to give something 4k. And then its secondary effect is you get to bounce a 3-drop or lower to the owner's hand, but that card has to be active. That's where playing this card can be tricky, because you can't bounce it if it's attacking. So that comes up a lot. It has a trigger to return a 4 or less to the owner's hand when it's triggered, so that can definitely come up, especially on defense. Because that one doesn't have to be active or rested or anything like that. It's just a static cost. Now, the thing about this card is if you stay to the end of the video, I'll go ahead and tell you some applications with this card, because you're not always going to be able to use it on the opponent, but you can still get full value out of this card's effect. So go ahead and stick around if you are interested in hearing about that. 2 copies of Love Beam. So this is the other 2k plus 4, but this one lets you draw a card if you play this and you only have 3 or less cards in your hand. So I'm only playing 2 each of the 2 cost counters, because I don't want to see them in the early game. Because early game you don't have a lot of Dawn, so you don't really want to leave Dawn up. You want to establish a board and all that. So I want to see these later game. And then I'm playing 2 copies of Desert Espada. So this is a 1 cost that gives you 2k. But the important effect is that it lets you do a mini Perona. When you play the card, you get to look at top 3. And then sculpt them, put them on the top or bottom in any order. And then its triggers draw 2 and trash 1. It's interesting. The deck still is in, motion. I'm still messing with ratios, but this is the list that I took to locals with. There's a couple cards in the deck I'm not sold with. I'm still messing around. But this card wasn't terrible. Alright, so let me go ahead and tell you about the matchups. So, we had 4 rounds at the locals. And my first round was against Red Luffy, and we took that. Then Purple Kaido, which we were able to go ahead and grab. The Red Zoro match in round 3 was hardly fought, but we were able to take the W. And then the finals was against Green Kid, which we were able to come out on top and go ahead and secure that promo. Now, as thanks for staying to this part of the video, like I told you, I will give you a little insight onto Overheato. So, like I was saying, this card is actually kind of difficult to pull off on your opponent's board. Because a lot of the time, they're just swinging with their 3 or lesses, and you're not going to really catch them on this too often. So how do you get full value out of this? Well, you can bounce your own cards, and it's much easier to control and set up for your own cards than it is to control your opponent's board and control their actions. So Perona is our example. Perona is the best card to try and set this up with. So when you play Perona, you get the sculpt top 5, and then she kind of just sits there. She's not going to swing very often at all. Like, every once in a while an opportunity come up, like if you're playing against green, the Bonnies and stuff are small, so you can swing over with Perona. But sometimes you even have multiple Perona. But all you need is Perona just sitting there chilling out like she does for the most part. And when you play the Overheat to get your 4k, then you can bounce the Perona back to your hand. Because it doesn't specify whose, you can get your own character back. So next turn you can pay the 1 for the Perona and go ahead and sculpt your deck again. You can even do something as far as you just want the extra 1k in it. Let's say you get attacked for 9, right? You can Overheat to make you 9, bounce the Perona, and then immediately guard with it to make 10. So a lot of the time with this card, it's not about getting a lot of value on the opponent's board, and you shouldn't overthink it. Like, if it comes up, sure, try and get the double, you know, because it blocks 2 attacks if you do that. You block the one for the 4K and then you can bounce an attacker. But think of it as just kind of being able to grind your own board a lot of the time, which is nice. That's how you get full value out of this card 100%, as long as you're controlling the bounce and not like kind of relying on the opponent to have a 3 for you to use this on. You can get plenty of value out of it just by having your own board set up, which is great. And that's the little tech that I wanted to tell you about Overheat, so that it's not dead in your hand if you're trying to get full value out of that secondary effect. You can most certainly do that very easily. I hope you enjoyed the profile. Hope I gave you a nice little list to maybe start on if you really wanted to play the Doflamingo Leader but wasn't really sure where to start. There are plenty of other options that you can test in this deck. A lot of people are playing the Pacifista engine. I just wasn't a big fan of it. That's me personally. You might like it. There's the Kuma that plays the Pacifista from hand. He's a target from Dofi. You can even try a Sentomaru package if you really want to. There's plenty of good blue cards. There's the Jinbei that isn't a target for Dofi, ironically, but it would be really good if it was. But he is removal, if nothing else. You know, he is removal on his own. But go ahead and, you know, test things out. If you find out anything, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Or if you already know something that you want to tell me about, go right ahead. I'd love to hear what you have to say about the leader. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope to see you again soon. See ya!